go back and talk to the UN People on the Wireless Initiative on where it might reside as far as being a neutral party that just maintains it.
Okay. When is Watson going to be ready to launch?
Cal.
Watson should be in the next couple of months.
In Bluemix.
You'll see services from Watson coming out in Bluemix.
So November? So we'll hear
Pretty
back
close to it.
from you all in November, and then do we think by February, International Open Data Day, we'll be able to have a platform online for knowledge management that we can ask people to use?
It'd be a nice kickoff, 6 UND.
I like that deadline. Just nod your head. Don't say anything, just nod.
Give it not on tape. Give it not on tape.
We'll just call that an informal MOU.
Yep.
All, that's great. Thank you all.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. The Sierra Leone team.
One voice.
The MRU team. The MRU team, we actually in Sierra Leone we are already discussing on part of the open government partnership. The 11th commitment was setting up an open data portal. But at the moment we are faced with an emergency, and we are discussing how do we make a sort of complementing efforts, looking at the broader picture of the open data portal and also responding to the Ebola crisis. So discussing with our brother from Liberia, these are some of the thoughts we had in terms of developing the Ebola tracker. It would be a sort of communication and feedback portal where we'll be getting information from the communities, reports on Ebola cases, and where exactly, what are the affected areas. We'll also be looking at the sort of resources that has been allocated, the donations that have been made, and where those donations are going to. And the information would be derived from statements from key public officials. Information will be distributed on WhatsApp, Facebook, SMS, pictures. We'll also be using community structures. We'll be using community radios and equally so religious representatives, the imams and the pastors of the churches will be the source of communicating some of these issues. Another thing that came up was that this issue of suspected Ebola carriers disappearing, how do we track them? And so information, for example, as to the timing of getting the results after a case has been tested, for example, needs to be communicated, and to also up the skills around contact tracing and how this could be done. Again, I did mention that initially that the whole essence of this is to see how we could address the communication deficiency that is surrounding the Ebola crisis. And one of the main points that a colleague from Liberia mentioned is that about 50% of the related deaths have been on Ebola as being caregivers, health workers. And so you find out that victims who are having related symptoms to Ebola like diarrhea or malaria, you know, the health workers are afraid to treat them. And so how could this be addressed? So some information around those issues need to come out clearly. We also need to step up. There are volunteers needed, Sierra Leonean volunteers around the world to work on this. And the creation of a map to be able to address the question of mobility. Because the whole issue around the Ebola crisis is about people moving from one location to the other and infecting the areas that they've moved on to. And finally, we're looking at initially the languages that we'll be using for communication will be two. English and Creole, which is widely spoken. As I did say, this is going to be part of the Open Data Portal initiative, but the Ebola aspects would be like the starting point, and then we'll make it incremental, encompassing a number of issues that we want to put in the portal in the long run. Thank you very much.
So can I just ask, first of all, thank you. This was really, really interesting, and you all have gone through so many of the different components of what would be necessary. So as far as a communication tool, portal, and knowledge management, I wonder how much it's addressing crisis response, which is what is happening right now, and how much it is setting up for the future. So I'm curious where that line comes in. And what is needed to actually move this forward, that we can actually convene and get people to work together. Because there's a lot of components here that, I mean, you have so many audiences and you have so many stakeholders. So what can we actually do?
Okay, one of the things I want to mention, and my colleagues will also pick on that, there are some initiatives going on the ground at the moment. What we need to have is like a central hub to collect all of this information and put it out there. A number of agencies are doing little bit here and there, but there is no central hub there, and that's creating a whole lot of distrust around the system to see what's happening and where do you get real-time information.
Okay, so it sounds like the Sierra Leone government might be the best organization to own the hub,
To host this.
the host, or at least to empower whoever does host it.
Exactly.
Either that or
Procurement's difficult. It's procurement. So, but then you also need people who can validate whether the information on the site is quality. So that's a lot of convening of expertise.
Well, as far as Sierra Leone government is concerned, if you are to help us put together this portal, to tell you the truth, for right now, we don't mind. We are not going to say set stone on the Sierra Leone government participation in this. Because what we are trying to build, we want to build something parallel to what the government is doing. And we want to maintain independency. And if that's the case, we can have something together here in the U.S., operated in the U.S., and just make sure that we get the feedback from Sierra. We produce we give you guys the information needed to really enhance the portal or whatever information it is. So we are not, for this emergency tool that we are asking for, we really want to create an independent atmosphere where the people, the trust will come in from the public. We will prevent ourselves getting the public saying we are manipulating, or government is manipulating the information. We have our people there to feed independent information, and we want that information to be shown out there regardless. So I believe if you want to do the
Kat, I would kind of label this as a sort of a resilience application, almost like a peer-to-peer 311 system. Typically, 311 systems in the United States it's like a number like your 644, but it's government controlled. So you call into the government to report a service outage or a problem in your neighborhood, any type of problem. And then the government is supposed to provide some response to you within a period of time. In this case, we have people reporting information, problems, and solutions without the centralized hub. And Kat, are you thinking? That's kind of what I was thinking when she was describing this idea is a kind of peer-to-peer messaging system between different parties.
So that's often what we do in disaster responses, is have these kinds of short codes.
Right.
But there's something a bit larger at play here. There is a field of expertise on disaster response and how you spin up tech solutions to disaster response. So I don't think that that's something that we need to solve today. or by solving today, maybe connecting you to people who are far more adept than we are. And where open government and open data comes into play, the fact that government is here and asking you, that's the biggest step. And then as Steve is talking about peer-to-peer, we've had a lot of success just in, I have a need or I have a resource,
Right.
doing that peer-to-peer connection. There's a lot of mapping tools, Ushahidi, a lot of people have used. I'm sorry they couldn't present here today, but that can be a lot of using a map to overlay what the
Yes.
resources and needs are. And then also you can have volunteers do the translation into different languages. So I would, if that's something that you all are looking for, I'd love to connect you. And if anybody else is interested and knows some of the crisis response community, I think that would be
Mhm.
something that we want to support.
Yes. Quickly.
Right. Yes. Yeah, I mean, yes. Okay.
Excellent. Good job.
Hi. Our group was the budget and tax group.
Who are you?
Oh, I'm Siobhan Green. I run a small IT consultancy working in ICT for development. So just to kind of go through a little, we talked a lot about the background and the problems being faced. So just to kind of quickly outline in terms of a standard budget process, the government will outline the needs, the requirements of the budget. They'll prepare the budget through various different ways, including looking at the tax code and making decisions about who gets taxed and at what rate. There's an approval process, oftentimes done by a parliamentary system, and then they obviously start spending the money, and then they monitor and evaluate it. That's a nice, simple way of doing it. Now, the challenges come in really under the expenditure and monitoring and evaluation, and really making sure that the money's going to where it needs to go to, and that it's being used appropriately is a huge challenge for a lot of countries. We also talked a little bit about where the revenue comes from and how revenue comes from taxes, fees, comes from donor assistance, it comes from loans. And oftentimes tracking where the money's coming in from and then where it's going to is also a huge challenge. Some of the big themes that kept on coming across as we were talking about these challenges were that having the raw data is not enough. It has to be contextualized, it has to be used, especially if you're trying to get citizen engagement to make decisions around where money should be spent and whether it's being spent appropriately. So it has to be framed for those different constituencies. There's a very large role of the donors that could play, especially since they do have a percentage of the total budget in some cases, as well as be giving good examples. Really you need to have political will to make budget and tax information open, as well as the logistical support. Not to minimize the logistical challenges, they're pretty huge, but you're not going to get anywhere if you don't have political support. Especially in budget and taxes, there's a lot of issues around human nature, wanting to, say, obfuscate information, hide information because they're talking about money. Anti-corruption is a big area that most people want to get down to the heart of. And finally, whatever you do, you need to have feedback loops in order for that various constituencies to see how resources are being used, are they being prioritized. So we had a lot of conversations about the problems, because there's a lot of problems. When we got down to solutions, we really had two very quick summaries. One was look at a model country. A couple of countries we looked at were India and Honduras, who've done a really great job of working with their budgets and making them more open and available, but also perhaps suggesting that a donor find a model country and sort of go soup to nuts all the way through the entire budget process to see what works well. And maybe a smaller country like one of the Caribbean countries, et cetera, just to really get to the heart of how do you make the public financial management actually effective and transparent, because I don't know that any country's done it beautifully. Secondly, one of the suggestions we came out of it was we talked a little bit about the International Aid Transparency Initiative, which for those of you who are unaware, it's something that all the donors, with a few exceptions, have signed on to, including the US government, to make their donor assistance information public. So this isn't just about how much money they're giving, it's also who they're giving it to, for what purpose, and eventually have it geocoded at a subnational level, have it linked to information on monetary evaluation indicators, descriptions, etc. So it allows, it's a standardized structure across all countries so that a country can look and say, okay, this is what DFID's giving, this is what Danita's giving, this is what US government's giving, where's it going to, how effective is it, and you can really then help that transparency initiative. So our thought there was, because this is already moving forward, because the US government especially has signed on to this, as this is an example to give to governments about how to make other parts of their budget more transparent. We did talk a lot about the tax system and trying to make that more transparent, but that sort of, we put that to one side to say, wow, that's a really big problem.